Okay, so the third speaker, John, will tell us about the observability in Rails. It's a really cool topic for me. I'm really curious about it. So, welcome, John.
Thank you.
Good luck.
So I'm going to talk about how to fix production bugs quickly and the power of structured logging. So I work for a company called Bigger Pockets. We work in the real estate sector. And this is, oh, okay. One sec. Okay, second go. I work at a company called Bigger Pockets. We're in the real estate sector. And the following is based on true story. Names have been changed to protect the innocent. So, stop me if this sounds familiar. I'm on call, and it's a Friday afternoon. And I get a Slack notification. It's from the support channel. Something's going wrong. Oh, and another one. Okay, looks like password reset emails aren't working. Oh, right, another one. This looks like an emergency. So let's search the logs. Ah, okay. Fair enough. Well, let's check the code. Code looks fine, which doesn't really help. And it's 20 minutes since the incident, and our CTO, James Green, not his real name, is getting a little bit anxious. He's now escalating it to the board. People are taking to Twitter and complaining, oh dear, nobody can get into their accounts. They're all locked out. So fine, I pair with a colleague. And under great pressure, we figure out, oh, the emails are using background jobs. Let's put some logging in background jobs. Excellent. Okay, cool. Whilst waiting for the app to deploy, it fixes itself. That's interesting. So we'll do it later, right? We'll just put it on the backlog, and we all know what happens to things in the backlog, don't we? They definitely get done, all of them. So, I mean, it's just a one-off incident, right? Right, okay. Maybe not so much. Oh, it's happening again. Oh dear, okay. But that's okay. No, that's definitely okay. It's okay because we added the extra logging. Fine, we'll search the, oh, right. Still nothing. Let's take a look at the Sidekick admin dashboard, and we can see that there's loads of process jobs. And how does that help us? Yeah, it doesn't really. So we found ourselves in this vicious cycle, and we would add extra bits of ad hoc logging here and there, and then we would deploy it, and then we would wait for the incident to happen again, and then we would just go around in this big vicious cycle, and we were wasting time. It was very embarrassing for the company, and all in all, it was not good. So I put out a survey because I wondered, maybe this is just me. And I asked 50 engineers the following question. I'm not going to read it out to you because you're all engineers and you can read. But yeah, so basically, the results kind of shocked me. It turns out that 30% of people lack visibility into their app on a weekly basis. That means people are doing what we were doing at least once a week. And 54% of people, it's every month. Wow, okay, so maybe it's not just us. And now I want to talk a bit about the feelings that I have. As engineers, we don't really like to talk about our feelings very much, maybe. But first of all, I get really annoyed. Like, seriously, this is 2024. How can it be this difficult? And then I just kind of get a bit sad. Oh, well, this is kind of a bit boring. I'm just kind of going around in circles. There's a stack trace. I'll look into the stack trace, still no clues. And then I start to feel the pressure. It's like an hour, 2 hours. I've still not solved the problem. There's an outage. This is really critical. And then I start to think, well, maybe the problem's me. And hang on, I'm an experienced engineer. I've been doing this for 10 years. I've got to go to my boss and tell him, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I can't fix this. Not a good look. So I've got good news for you. The problem isn't you, and you're not alone if you've ever felt like this. And at Bigger Pockets, I experienced this, and I came up with 5 steps to implement a solution to this. And this is what we've been doing for the last 2 years, and we've been going round and round this cycle. Question that you want answered, decide which data to collect, build the instrumentation, use it, and then improve. And if you turn it on its side, it's got some kind of steps. So I call it the Steps to Observable Software, or SOS. It's kind of a backronym. I started with SOS, and then, okay. Anyway, so let's walk through that example with these 5 steps. So the first of all is, what question do we want answered? Well, why are password reset emails not being sent? Now, that is a really general question. So the first thing we need to do is drill down into a more specific question. And to do that, we need to form some hypotheses. Why might this be going wrong? It might be failing or timing out, or it might be delayed. Well, we don't have any errors in the logs, so it's not failing. Again, if it was timing out, we'd probably have some kind of errors in the logs. So I'm guessing, and it is a guess, it's going to be delayed. So how do we rule out whether that's correct or not? Well, we ask ourselves a more specific question. Which jobs are taking the most time within the same queue? So all the emails are going to this within 5 minutes queue in Sidekick. And so to answer that question, we need to turn to data. There's no use guessing. We can't look at the code base and just divine it using the power of our minds. We need to figure out what we want to gather. So I use these 4 criterias. So first of all, what's the event we want? Well, we want to know something that whenever a job gets performed, we're getting that data. We want to filter by jobs performed on a queue. We want to group by job class. This will be able to let us know whether it's the mailer job, whether it's something else that is blocking these mails getting through. And we want to look at the values of duration, because the hypothesis is, just in case you're, the hypothesis is we've got all these mailers and they're all getting queued to Sidekick, but there's maybe 2 or 3 hours delay and the queue is getting full of lots of other jobs before these messages getting sent, which would make sense of why it kind of resolves itself after a while. And in an ultimate twist of ironic fate, when I was booking my flight to this very conference, I had this exact issue. The flight said, oh, we've sent your account confirmation. Without that, I can't do anything on their site, right? And so I waited for an hour, 2 hours. I went to bed and I got up the next morning. 4 hours later, the email had landed in my inbox. Obviously, it times out within 10 minutes. So yeah, that was really useful. Thanks, Wizz Air. So let's build some instrumentation to answer those questions now. So I want to go through 4 different kind of topics. What data type should we use? Should we use plain text or structured logging? What logging library to use? And what customization needs to be done? Now, it's talk about structured logging, so I'm guessing you can answer for yourself the first 2, but I want you to take through why. So these are often talked about as the 3 pillars. They're not 3 pillars. They're 3 data types. And traces are the most useful, followed by logs, followed by metrics. Metrics are the least useful. And there's all sorts of trade-offs, but given that structured logging is coming in Rails 8, and given that logging is fairly familiar to most engineers, let's start with logs. And why plain text versus structured? Why structured? Well, here's what plain text logs look like in code. I'm sure you've seen this before, logger.info, pretty standard stuff. It's got the job class and the duration. And here is what it looks like in our observability tool, whether that's Sentry, New Relic, Airbrake, Honeybadger, AppSignal, Row versus Wild. They're all sponsoring today. So this is kind of a generic view. And so let's say we wanted to look at our action mailer jobs. We'd have to use a regular expression. Fantastic. How do we now search for any log with a duration of more than a certain amount? It's impossible. We can't do it. So that's useless to us. What we want is structured data attached to the log. And then this is like a bit like fields in a database, really. So we know how to filter, search, sort, group on fields in a database. So this is great. This is what it looks like in the UI. You can see we've got different columns for the different attributes. And so now we can say, show me everything with a specific job class within a specific queue. Awesome. This is nice. We like this. Now, finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about what logging library to use, because there are a lot out there. Here are my 4 criteria. The third one, great documentation, is very subjective. I have very high standards for documentation, so your results may vary. I've also removed any logging library that hadn't had a commit for about a year, or anything that looked fairly new. And these are basically the choices you've got. Before I go off and criticize all these gems, I want to give a big shout out to anyone doing open source. It's really hard work. It's a really thankless task. So I'm not trying to rip apart anybody's hard work. That being said, according to these criteria, here's how it shakes out, and Semantic Logger comes out as essentially the winner. So here's why we install it. No surprise there. It's also got Rails bindings, so we can install those too. We set the format to be JSON, and that's how these observability tools can ingest structured logs. Cool. So Semantic Logger and Rails Semantic Logger gives you some fairly bog standard things out of the box. It's not amazing, but it's okay to start out with. And these are libraries it hooks into, and I just want to give you a very brief tour of what it gives you in your logs. So this is the kind of thing that it gives you after an action has been completed in Action Controller. You can see the duration down here, pretty critical, the controller and action, and then it shows you some fairly standard attributes for HTTP requests. So that's kind of cool. Action Mailer. Now there's a bit of a gotcha here. Action Mailer just sends unfiltered emails to your logs, which is not good. You do not want personally identifiable information in your logs, so you'd have to filter this out. These 3 little attributes here have saved my life more than several times. This is the mailer that was called, and the action that was called on it, aka the method, and the arguments that was passed to that mailer. So let's say you're sending a mailer for an invoice, and you pass in the invoice ID here. You can now go to your logs and search for that invoice ID. Really useful. And then action view, it's kind of a level debug, not much to see here. Active record, it logs every SQL request. Those of you who've been to the performance workshop know what I'm talking about here. And then finally, the bit that this talk is centered around is active job. And so you can see here, it gives us the queue and job class. And lo and behold, it gives us the event name, which is essentially job performed. Fine. So everything's good. We're all ready to rock and roll. We just add Rails, Semantic Logger, and it all works perfectly, right? Well, not quite. Because it turns out this is an area where convention over configuration has been kind of left in the weeds a little bit. So there's no conventions for how we do structured logging. There's a lot of missing attributes, and API requests aren't instrumented out of the box, and I could rant for a lot longer. These are just the 3 biggest problems. So let's talk about no conventions. All of these are fine. Use job.class, use job.classname, use job.class.name, and anybody can use anything, and it's all fine, right? Well, we know how that turns out. So I want to introduce those of you who haven't heard it, OpenTelemetry. This is an open source project. It's the 2nd fastest growing open source project. It's sponsored by the Cloud Native Foundation. They've been doing a lot of work for the last 5 years to standardize a lot of this stuff. There's a Ruby library for it. Sadly, it's fairly immature still. It needs a lot of maintenance. It needs a lot of help to get it up to scratch. But what we can do is we can look at their semantic attributes. So they've got essentially what we want, which is for this kind of attribute, it should be called this. And rather unintuitively, a queue in active job is called messaging.destination.name. Now you can alias that to be a bit more human friendly in your observability tool, but this is the correct name for it. And so just to remind you, this is the kind of thing that will be spat out. And then this is the kind of thing that we want. So the previous one there, that's what's given by Rails Semantic Logger out of the box. And this is what we want if we want to adhere to OpenTelemetry and future-proof it. So In order to do that, we're going to have to be a little bit hacky, I'm afraid. We're going to find the log subscriber for active job inside Rails semantic logger, and we'll copy it into our project, we'll rename it, and then we'll replace this payload event here. And you can see it's just a hash, it's just Ruby hash, and it maps a few things. And then we'll swap out our internal log subscriber for the Rails semantic one, and hey presto, this is what we get. Awesome. Missing attributes next. So all of these things are missing, and a lot more besides. So some pretty basic things that you kind of need to, in my opinion, to run an app. And let's just talk about headers and user agent, and then I'll leave it as work for the listener to figure out the rest. So here's the name for http://quest.header.key. That's the standard OTel name for that. Standard OTel name for user agent. And now we can add something to our application.rb that adds those to every single HTTP request. There's the http://request.header. There's two different styles here. There's a lambda style and a straight hash style. And you can see there's our extra attributes in the log. Fine. So now we're going to talk about API requests. I'm going to simplify this a little bit and assume we're all using Faraday, which we all know is the best HTTP client. Nod along with me. Yes, good, thank you. So here's a little bit of middleware we're going to make in Faraday. And then we're going to call the API, whatever we want. I'm using this invented URL. And then we can add this response middleware in here. And here's what we get. So a lot of those weaknesses, I just wanted to whip through how I've solved them. There's a lot more besides that. So let's move on to how to send it to our observability tool. So this is now logging all of these lovely JSON logs internally. How do we send it? Now, there are three sponsors for this talk, for this conference: AppSignal, Honeybadger, and Row versus Wild. So I thought I'd show you how to do it for each one of those. This is how Row versus Wild looks. So in Semantic Logger, you have these things called appenders, and it's just a destination basically. So you can send it to you can send your logs to multiple destinations, which is really handy. And you can see I'm just subclassing one of the out-of-the-box appenders at the top, changing a little bit of code. And here's how it looks in Row versus Wild. This is how it looks for Honeybadger in the code. Here is a mock-up of how the logs look in Honeybadger. And then finally for AppSignal, same deal. So that was an awful lot. I've got some links to the slides and various other resources at the end of the talk, so don't worry if you've skipped past any of those. I want to make this as helpful for you as you can. So next, let's deploy that, and let's use the graphs, which in my opinion is the best bit. You can look at logs, okay, fine, but graphs is where it really starts to get very useful. And as a reminder, this is what we wanted. So here are our logs with all of our brand new shiny attributes here. You can see event.name, code.namespace, which is basically job.class, same thing. And so we're going to filter by the queue. This is all the Sidekick jobs within 5 minutes queue, instantly, seconds. And then we filter by all the jobs performed, because you've got job performed, job enqueued, job enqueued at. This is the one that we want. And then we change the range to the last hour. We group by the job class, and boom, we've got it. Pretty cool. And so some tips I've got for using graphs: check the time range. I can't tell you how many times I'm pulling my hair out. Why can I not find this? And I've set it to within the last 5 minutes. Oh, it was 2 days ago. That'll be why. And then don't go to the search and just start typing regular expressions and free-form searches in. It's guaranteed to get you in a doom loop. Try and find whatever tool you're using, the exact attribute in the UI. It could be in a drop-down, and then filter by that, because that's so it exposes what's there. And then go wide and gradually narrow down. Don't just search immediately for exactly what you want. Those tips have really helped me in the last couple of years. And the final step is to improve. So I'm a very critical person. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, type A personality. So I like to criticize my own work, and I rip it to shreds. And then I maybe add another bit of instrumentation, deploy it again, another bit, tweak it. And then once I'm relatively happy, I tend to show it to my colleagues and say, oh, what do you think of this? And generally speaking, they will say to me, I don't care about that, John. However, what I would love to know about is, let's say, test suite. So test suite speed, we had this issue recently where somebody said that exact thing to me. And within 4 or 5 hours, we'd added some custom logging to our RSpec test suite. And we knew that 78% of our test suite runtime came from 17% of the test suite. And that 17% was all, surprise, surprise, system specs. Who would have guessed it? So there's a lot more things that we could add on at this stage. We could add request ID, IP, job latency, and a whole bunch of other things. But I'm sure you get the idea. So at Bigger Pockets, we've been around this cycle many, many times. And I want to re-examine the original outage with what we have today. And this is actually how we examined the original outage when it happened. So it's Friday morning this time, not Friday afternoon. I'm still on call, boo, but I now get a notification from Slack. And this is not a customer. This is not somebody in support. This is our monitoring software saying, hey, like this queue here, it's supposed to complete within 5 minutes, and it's now completing within 10. So this is before any issue has happened, any customer has complained. So this is nice. We can click a link, and here's what we see. You can see at the top there, job performed. It's grouping by the messaging destination name or the queue name. And you can see this blue line. Hover over it, and you can see the within 5 minutes queue is at a total of 15 minutes duration. That is not good. So let's ask a question. Which jobs are taking the most time? So we start out by looking at jobs performed. We want to see everything within that 5 minutes queue. We want to group by job class, and let's take the sum of duration. Okay. Pretty simple, few seconds. Analytics, update, user visits, job. That seems a bit weird. Let's ask our next question. What's in queuing those jobs? Okay, good question. Let's search for job.enqueued. That's the event we want. We want to look at the same queue. But this time we want to group by http.resource. This is a combination of the controller name and the action. And then just let's look at all the logs. Okay. So it looks like the profile show is enqueuing a whole bunch of jobs, and it's rising. Interesting. What's the next question? What IP is hitting that action? Let's do the same thing. Now this time we're looking at an event called HTTP request handled, which is an event that gets triggered every single time our app handles an HTTP request. Surprise, surprise. We want to group it, we want to filter it by that same controller, and we want to group by IP. So we want to see which of the biggest IPs hitting us. Pretty clear. It's that IP there. At this point, we've spent about maybe 6 or 7 minutes, and we've got an answer. So let's just recap. There's clearly somebody at this IP address scraping our app, hitting that profile show controller. This floods the queue with analytics jobs, and that delays password reset emails. Okay, pretty clear. We have the data, we have the technology. So now the fix is we just need to block the IP in the infrastructure. Go into Cloudflare, do whatever we want. Not do whatever we want, that would be a bad idea. Let's just block the IP. And then we can check, is it fixed? This is a super cool bit. We just go back into the original graph. Oh, it's falling. I think we're done. That's it. Nothing to see here. So how does this feel? Well, as an engineer, it feels incredible. I feel empowered. I feel like, you can hit me with anything now. And I have the tools in order to ask the questions to get the results. And it turbocharges your debugging. And it basically means you're absolutely invincible, essentially. And it kind of gets addictive as well. And you kind of stop at the outage and you start to ask other random questions like, I wonder why the traffic spikes on a Wednesday at midday. Oh, okay, there's a lot of people from iOS hitting us. I wonder why that is. I wonder why that is. And you start to realize some quite surprising things. Recently, I was just looking at the logs, completely unrelated, and I saw we were getting a whole load of 404s. So that's a bit weird. And it turns out there was, again, a scraper going through every single combination of username on our profiles page. All right, okay, go into Cloudflare, block the scraper, and our request time reduced by, I think it was 19%. Just another Tuesday at the office. So what are the results of this? Our downtime has had a 98% reduction drop in the last 18 months. We've fixed 83% of our 500 errors. There are still a lot, but it's a massive improvement. And finally, we can fix bugs 20 times faster. So there's some extra resources for you at this QR code. There's a link there if you want to go to that. I've got a free playbook. I've got a Sidekick course that's $1. You can join my newsletter for free, of course. And also, I'm running a special offer on my workshop that I'm running in October. Just enter that coupon code and it'll get you 90% off. This expires when the after party starts. So feel free if you're interested. And that's me. I work for a company called Bigger Pockets, and I run a business called Joyful Programming to bring more joy to the world of programming. What questions do you have?
Any question? Yes.
Thank you for your nice talk. Don't you think that the proper fix would be to add some sort of a rate limiting for this endpoint? Because basically anybody could DDoS some part of your application with those requests.
Yes. Next question.
Okay, thank you.
Up there. That's a really good question because it was misconfigured, is the short answer. But I mean, yeah, it's kind of funny, isn't it? But the fact is, we don't know this kind of stuff. Like before we had all this instrumentation, we were just, oh, everything's fine. I mean, the app's up. It looks like it's serving 200s. It's fine, right? There's no burning issue. But when you start digging, you find out all of these unusual patterns. And the more instrumentation you add, the more curious you get. And it starts making you realize, oh, hang on. Yeah, the Cloudflare is misconfigured because guess what? Cloudflare is ridiculously complex. I know a guy called Ashley who's writing a massive tome on Cloudflare. Yeah, it's easy to get these things wrong. And where's the unit tests for Cloudflare? Anyone unit tests for Cloudflare? Yeah, you can't do it, can you? So there's certain things you can only test in production. And I'm not ragging on unit tests, to be absolutely clear. I'm a huge fan of TDD. I want decent test coverage. And I'm one of the big proponents of unit testing. But ultimately, there are certain things you're only going to be exposed to in production. You cannot get a perfect, accurate replica of your production system on your staging system. It's a fool's errand. It costs too much money.
A follow-up question. Do you remember, by any chance, what was misconfigured?
Yeah, it was the fact that we were doing this really dumb thing where we were just blocking individual IP addresses. And of course, what does a scraper do? They just recycle the IP address, right? And so like, oh yeah, it's blocked. Hey, yeah, let's go about our day. And then they just recycle and use another one and another one. So eventually we added rate limiting, as this chap was here saying. So, but then we needed to tweak the rate limiting. That's the other thing. You know, you can put it in place, but then you realize, oh, it's too lax. And they're still getting through. Oh, it's like too tight. So now that's blocking real customers. And with this kind of instrumentation, you can go really fast. You can tweak it in Cloudflare, go back to the logs. Oh, okay, that's a bit too lenient. Tweak it again. Oh, that's a bit too harsh. And then you can get that fast feedback. It's basically unit testing on steroids in production. That's how I think of it. It allows you to go on this fast feedback loop where you keep asking these questions and getting responses. Incredibly powerful.
Hi. Thanks a lot for the talk. I wanted to ask, well, on our project, we use New Relic's feature like transaction reporting. So they track basically all of that in their format without us like writing that stuff to our text logs, right? And we solve similar problems by digging through New Relic's interfaces and queries, but which is, I guess, alternative solution for this problem, right?
And you just use the magic phrase, we're digging through the logs.
Yes.
I wouldn't call what I've just shown there digging through the logs. I would call that 4 little queries and then you get your answer. I can't tell you how much time I've spent with out-of-the-box tools that, like all due respect to New Relic, I've spent hours and hours in the New Relic interface, and then the result is, maybe it's that, possibly, not quite sure. But with this level, it takes the standard out-of-the-box tools to just a whole new level. And instead of digging through, you just go, oh, well, it's got to be that URL. It's got to be that controller. Okay, there's only one thing left. And I'm not saying this is perfect. I mean, we've got about 40% of where I want to get to at Bigger Pockets. So we've still got a long way to go. But I've never seen an out-of-the-box solution that just gives, and that's the ideal. If you could just add in a gem and it gave you all of this stuff out of the box, great. But I don't think we're there yet.
Cool, thanks.
What do you use for graphs to show these cool graphs?
Yeah. Do you mean the graphs that I did in the presentation, or just what tools do we use?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so at work we use Datadog. I've used New Relic before. I have various opinions on both of them. Come and talk to me afterwards. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. We use Datadog. Yeah.
I really appreciate your presentation on the semantic logger. That was great, and a bit in this notion what Hannah started about, like, upcoming future of Rails 8. I know that semantic logger is coming into Rails, but do you maybe know will it be going after this gem that you have used in your solution, or not?
That's a great question. Thank you. I didn't know that semantic logger is coming into Rails. That sounds really positive. All I've seen is the GitHub issue that announces we're adding structured logging into Rails 8. There is one tiny little code snippet that's been supplied, which is logger.struct and then a hash. And aside from that, I don't know anything about it. The guy who made that comment said, I'm not going to be working on it in the first half of this year. And that was in February. And we're now in July, right? So who knows when that's going to be here. What I do know is that DHH and Basecamp are talking with Shopify and a lot of other very big sites, and they're going to kind of scrunch together everything that's worked for them and extract it into Rails 8. Aside from that, I don't really know. But I'd love to. There's one person up there.
Okay, the last one.
One more.
I don't want to walk that much.
If you do have any more questions, I'll be at the after party, and as you can see, I'm kind of difficult to miss. So,
hey, thanks for the presentation. I know that monitoring can be pretty expensive, especially on a large scale. Do you have any tips on how not to go bankrupt?
So if you don't want to go bankrupt, buy a massive multi-terabyte hard drive, put Grafana on it, and you're done. Joking aside, there was a whole phase of our engineering development that was spent on reducing costs a little bit. It blew my mind how expensive it was. And I think as an engineer, I was not exposed to that billing data. And the moment I saw the bills come through, I got white hair basically. And at the time we were logging for, I don't know, maybe 150,000 line app, so a pretty small app. We were logging over 1 billion requests a month. 1 billion log entries a month. And I remember coming home and saying to my partner, that's like 1/7 of everybody on planet Earth. Sounds like we're doing something wrong. So I kind of went off into logs, and I reduced now the logs to just the essentials. In Semantic Logger, there's a little filter. You can give it a lambda. It's pretty basic, but you can say exclude any log that contains this text. And so there was a bunch of gems kind of spamming the logs. And through that and various other methods, I reduced our billing by about 40% a month. and that saved the company, I can't remember, I think it was like $14,000 a year. And that took me maybe a day or something like that. So I'm really big into trying to make sure that the logs are only what you need. And to that point, there is a gem, a really great bit of software. I've not had a chance to try it out yet, but it's called Prefab. And you can change the log levels and what gets logged on and off in real time without any redeploys. And I've definitely got that on our list. Let's have a conversation about that afterwards. There's a lot more detail. I don't want to bore everybody else.
Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you.